Introduced for the 1995 model year, the Oldsmobile Aurora was designed to take Oldsmobile in a completely different direction from the vehicles that it was producing up until that point. In order to achieve this objective and attack both the Japanese and German imports, Oldsmobile enabled designers to have a clean sheet approach for this Aurora. The result was a dramatically new styled vehicle that looked unlike any Oldsmobile before it and was arguably the most beautiful Oldsmobile that was introduced since the 1966 Tornado. Dennis Burke served as the chief of one of Olds' exterior studios during this time, and he and his team shaped the Aurora that made it to the road in 1995. Dennis agreed to sit down with us to talk about his time and the Aurora program. He also wished to acknowledge all the designers and sculptors that worked on the program, as well as his friend John Perkins, who served as the design chief of the Aurora during its early developmental phase. Let's welcome Dennis Burke to the program and hear more about the design of the iconic 1995 to 99 Oldsmobile Aurora. Well, welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. We have another special treat here today, and that is Dennis Burke, who did, amongst a number of other things. Dennis has quite the automotive resume and background, but among other vehicles that Dennis designed and was a part of the design team is the 1995 to 1999 Oldsmobile Aurora. So, Dennis, I have to say, one of my, favorite GM designs of the last, 40, 50 years almost.
Yep.
It was just an absolute home run. So we're privileged to have you and to talk about that. And even it's amazing as I look back at your career, everything from the 81 Monte Carlo theme to the 81 Cutlass front end theme to the 86 EK cars and the Tornado to the Aurora to even the 2002 Escalade. Mm-hmm. Just say a few words maybe about your career. And you have a very interesting background. You're not different classical background there.
Yeah, I didn't take the traditional designer route, which, I'd say 99% of most designers have a degree in transportation design from such schools as Art Center in California and right here in Detroit, Center for Creative Studies. I took a little bit more unusual route. I got accepted to General Motors Institute, which is an engineering school, obviously, and I was sponsored by Design Center. I had to bring in a modest portfolio, and they thought that there was enough potential there that I could make it as a designer. So for the next 5 years, I bounced back and forth between engineering and working in the studios as a co-op student. And that's where I picked up all my design skills, looking over the shoulder of some of the best designers in the world at the time. So it was quite a unique education, and one I don't think you could even get in an art school, but because you were working amongst or with the really great designers of the time. So, like I said, it was an unusual route, but it paid off. And having the engineering knowledge, quite frankly, didn't hurt me in my career. In fact, in some situations, it actually helped. And getting the Aurora assignment was one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, I should say, because at the time, Oldsmobile was somewhat struggling, and they were looking for a whole new direction. And that opportunity came up when the Advanced Studios were working on a design for a mid-size aerodynamic design, sedan rather, and it affectionately became known as the tube car. And Bud Chandler, who was a designer in the studio at the time, sketched some of the first theme sketches for this new mid-size sedan, which again affectionately became the tube car.
I like how we call it mid-size, and it's a 205-inch,
It
long
started
car.
out as a mid-size, and it grew a little bit over time. Okay, and there were some reasons for that too, because quite frankly, the platform, which was Flint Automotive Division at the time, which their platform was the C bodies, i.e. the 98s, the 88s, and they insisted that the car had to be engineered over that platform. So that pretty much dictated the size of the car. So it did grow from the original concept, But as you'll see in photos I'm about to show, it lost very little in the translation. This happens to be a sketch by Bud Chandler, which was one of the original sketches that got everybody excited. And oh, here's a sedan with a whole new theme direction. Gone are the hard edges, the vertical backlights, some of the traditional cues at the time. It totally broke with those traditions and caught the eye of quite a few people, especially Chuck Jordan, who was the vice president of design at the time. Another sketch we have here is just another version of the same theme. And again, it drew quite a bit of attention and admiration. So next step in the design process, I should say this all occurred in the advanced studios, not in the Oldsmobile studio, but in the advanced studios at the time. So it was kind of a, you know, an exercise that was extracurricular, if you will. So anyhow, it caught the attention of a lot of people, and then the next step was to go into a scale model, of course, which is part of the design process.
Now, did you get any pushback from the Olds folks on where's the egg crate grill, where's the fender skirts, where's the vertical?
Well, okay, good question, Adam, because, you know, Oldsmobile knew at the time that they really needed to change their direction. They needed a breakthrough design. Quite frankly, this is not your father's Oldsmobile, didn't help them much. And they were looking to change their image and get away from the traditional luxury car look. I'll also go back to 1990 when a couple of the Japanese companies made their entry into the luxury car market, namely Lexus and Infiniti. You know, I remember going to the auto show in 1990, and those cars had a huge impact. In fact, it caught the eye of Oldsmobile. I remember going out to California on test rides where we'd benchmark those vehicles, and Olds decided they wanted a car to go head-to-head with those Japanese imports, not to mention some of the German imports. So this design kind of fit the bill. It was like, unlike any luxury sedan at the time with GM, and they wanted something that was sleek, aerodynamic, head-turning, and represented a whole new direction for Oldsmobile. And this so-called tube car, which it affectionately became known as, fit the bill. Here's just a couple more sketches from the
not your father's Oldsmobile.
Not your father's Oldsmobile. Take note, no egg crate grill, no waterfall grills, no split grills. This was like, okay, we're going to wipe the slate clean and start with a clean sheet of paper here.
Was that hard for you? Because you also had done worked on the 91-98 and the 92-88
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
The so-called kind of updated your father.
Yeah, those were, you know, like evolutionary designs, whereas the Aurora obviously is revolutionary, okay? And the mood at the time was perfect for something like that for Oldsmobile. They realized that they needed, again, to change their image out there, and this was the perfect opportunity. Now, here's a photo of the full-size model being developed in the studio. As you can see, there's a lot of tape lines on it. It's like in the, I'd say, early stages of its progress. Few more photos. And, you know, as typical in the design process, you go from sketches, and if it shows a lot of merit, the next phase would be to go do a full-size airbrush rendering, which is taped over the engineering package, and then obviously airbrush watercolors applied to it to give it a full-size rendering appearance, which that was standard procedure back in the day. You know, the full-size rendering was kind of like the proof of the pudding, so to speak, to show that the car would fit over the package and not lose anything in the translation.
Did you ever cheat these, Dennis?
Very rarely, Adam. I mean, once in a while you nip the front overhang a little bit or the rear overhang, you know, just because of taking the effective perspective of the car. But very, very, very seldom. I mean, again, it was a test whether this design was going to work over the given package. So
You were more honest than some of your peers.
you
then?
were pretty much
Okay.
held to, not cheating on the package.
Okay.
Now, from this full-size rendering, the next phase, once it's gotten approval, would be to go to scale models. And these typically were 3/8 scale models, typically like 3.5 feet in length. So it's a pretty good size scale model, but it gives you an opportunity to explore the shapes and, do the surface development to give you a better idea, what the ultimate car is going to really turn out to be. Here's another, and this, by the way, I got to say, the scale model was absolutely gorgeous.
I love this. This is
The scale model was just mouth-watering, if I could put it that way. The reflections, the surfaces were superb. And the car has, and I'm sure you've heard this expression before, Coke bottle design, which from my point of view is more of a plan view thing. When you look down at the car swells at the rear wheels, tightens in at the waistline or the cockpit, and then swells out and over the front wheels. So this car really, really epitomized that Coke bottle theory or design cue.
And this was before the C-pillar had changed too to a different
Correct.
style.
Yeah. So, in any design, you go through an evolutionary process. It's iterative, changes occur because somebody comes in and has a different opinion or engineering can't execute a certain thing. So, the design is very, very evolutionary. It's in flux, for quite a while until things tighten up. But the scale model, again, got everybody's juices flowing, and that was enough to just convince everybody we needed to go full size with this. And Oldsmobile was right on board. They thought it was rare that management and Chuck Jordan, saw eye to eye on things, but in this particular case, it was unanimous. They said, "Yep, this is the design. This is what we want, and we're going to go from there."
For context, this is the late 80s as well here too.
This
right?
this is like around '89, okay? Like late, I'm going to say late '88, early '89 is when the car really started to gel and take shape.
So think about Olds' portfolio: the Cutlass Sierra, then the pretty boxy '88. That John Manoogian talked about the '98, as well.
Right.
It's amazing to think of this in the context of what was in the showroom at the time.
Yeah, and like I said, the mood at Oldsmobile was that they were just willing to look at anything, and they, when they saw this, is like it just rang the bell. Couple more photos of the full-size clay model development. Obviously, you could see the transition from scale model to full-size translated pretty well. And these are very, very early clay model renditions. So, and as I just said previously, it's going to go through a lot of evolution after that.
Yeah, dated 87, 88 on this one. I think.
Yeah. There you go. This was still when the car was in the advanced studios before it went up to Oldsmobile, when I took over the production version of it. From the scale model and full-size clay, then obviously the next step was what typically a design staff, if it's a design that has the approval of management, we go into a full-size fiberglass model. They take a cast right off the clay model, lay up fiberglass panels, and the tube car then went from clay to the full-size fiberglass. And I gotta say, when you see the photos here, it came off very, very well. And you'll also note that, there's an obvious connection between the tube car and the production version. The cross-car tail lamp, for instance, the front end design, even the upper. I mean, so it's not exactly the same as way it turned out, but pretty darn close. And that was the big challenge I had and the studio had was, okay, take this design, which doesn't meet all criteria, and preserve the design. Make sure it doesn't lose anything in the translation, but still meet bumper requirements, vision requirements. The big thing with this car, the chief engineer, Roger Mash at the time, absolutely insisted this was going to be a 25 hertz vehicle. And what that means is that's the natural frequency of the body, when it's going through like vibration and harmonics. And it was a pretty lofty goal because the only cars out there at the time that hit that benchmark were Mercedes. And Roger insisted that this car had to be as solid and tight as a Mercedes. The 25 hertz drove a lot of criteria in the car too. It affected, thickness of the pillars, height of the cowl, many other areas. So, I mean, it was something that we had to deal with, and there was no negotiating the 25 hertz. I gotta say, there was no negotiation. That's it. That's the way it's going to be. But we got through it very successfully, and the proof of the pudding was when you drove the car, it felt solid as a rock. I mean, it just really, you could tell the 25 hertz, you could feel it. Let's put it that way when you drove the car. So it was, in retrospect, it was well worth the effort. To do 25 hertz.
But you lost kind of the toothpicky A pillar, C pillar of the tube car.
Correct, Adam. I mean, it obviously drove a little thicker A pillar than we wanted. And there were other areas of the car, height of the cowl, like I said, this and that. But overall, I mean, we got through it, I think, pretty successfully. And again, one of the main traits of the tube car is the graphics in the rear, which telegraph that tubular shape. That was a really iconic part of the car that we also wanted to maintain because, that cross car sweep telegraphed the tubular nature of the vehicle.
A couple more of it too, a little different iteration. But I see the full width taillight to your point here. Coming through too.
Yeah, and
didn't make it with those door handles though.
No. Fortunately, that's one of the concessions you had to make. We had to use off the shelf hardware for the door handles. So
who made you do that, Dennis? Is that one of those bean counters that designers like?
Oh, bean counters, our favorite friend, our best friends.
Well, we're sitting together, right? It's not so hard. I know.
Well, I'm sure that played a part in it, but it was basically the platform said, which was Flint Automotive Division at the time, said you will use carryover door handles. We don't have enough money to invest in a whole new handle at this time. So those are the kinds of gives and takes that, you typically, see in a design process.
The funny thing, in 1997, they redesigned the underside of the door handle so it didn't slip in the wet weather as much.
Yep.
So I guess you got your door handle a little bit unique.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there was other things too. The mirrors, that was a challenge in itself too because they had to be breakaway. They had to, But anyhow, like I said, there's concessions. But, overall, sometimes those things actually help the car rather than hurt it. There's been more than one occasion where you say, oh, okay, maybe that was the right thing to do. So, it was always a team effort. I mean, with engineering, marketing, finance, it truly was a team effort. And we worked very closely together.
I noticed this one has the lattice wheels that was kind of an Olds thing for a little bit in the 80s.
BBS wheels were the hot thing. The cross-laced cast aluminum wheels were the really big deal in the late 80s. And so it wasn't unusual for Design Center to grab a set and throw them on a model.
Okay.
A lot of times we took, current wheels, aftermarket wheels, and put them on the car until we came up with our own design.
Just a few final ones here, but it's amazing, like you said, how much of this made it through to production in terms of the theme, and which is rare. I still don't know how the stamping guys agreed to all these curves.
Well, the biggest point of contention, and I've talked to you about this before, was the silica bronze joint, where the upper panel meets the quarter panel. Back in the old days, almost all cars in the 60s and 70s had a silica bronze joint up at the top where the roof meets the quarter panel, which is a very labor-intensive operation. You know, they put silica bronze, and there's a hand grinding process and finishing. So, you know, time is money kind of thing. It's expensive, time consuming. And when it came to the Aurora, we just couldn't come up with an elegant solution introducing a joint between the quarter panel and the upper. I mean, we tried a number of things, and it just destroyed the overall continuity and flow in that area of the vehicle. So that was a big concession we got from Flint Automotive Division at the time. I remember Mark Royce was, at the time, working up there as an engineer. He took us through the plant to show us how difficult it was to do that joint. But they succumbed. They finally realized that there was no great solution without upsetting the theme of the car. So that was one concession we got. And the fact that it was a small joint, not something like a foot long, helped, I guess. But that was a bone of contention for quite a while, that joint just between the upper and the quarter panel.
And I noticed this is getting close to final here, but it still has the rocket logo. It says Oldsmobile on this vehicle. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
This is pretty late in that decision.
That's a good point, Adam. And you know, like I said, Oldsmobile was desperately looking to change their image, turn it around. And it was John Rock who came on later in the program, and he was the new general manager for Oldsmobile, and he felt very strongly that this car should not have the word Oldsmobile or any rocket emblems on it anywhere. And whether that was a good decision or not, well, history will show, but he immediately wanted all Olds identification. In fact, the only Olds identification on the production version was the word Oldsmobile on the radio in the interior. So, you know, it was a tough decision, and, you know, the Aurora got its own signature graphic that's on the front and rear of the car. But, in fact, if you look at some of the early photos, it had the rocket emblems and the word Oldsmobile on it, and we ultimately got rid of it. And I think a year or two later, we reintroduced the word Oldsmobile on the rear of the car.
97 it appeared briefly.
Yes.
And then it kind of went away again.
Yes. That was kind of a back and forth issue. Again, who was right, who was wrong, only history will tell. But, you know, obviously Oldsmobile, you know, going into the early 2000s, you know, sales really started plummeting, and, you know, the rest, as they say, is history. But it was an honor and a privilege to work on the Aurora. I think it really made a great statement. It was a fine car all the way around with the so-called Northstar V8 and the 25 hertz body structure, luxurious interior. The interior was, you know, very, very unique and upscale as well. So all around, it was a great, great car. I remember going on many rides out in Phoenix, Arizona, where the GM proving grounds were, desert proving grounds, and it was so gratifying, not only to see the car on the road, but just to experience the car. And I'll never forget, there's a highway that leads out of Phoenix, and we were driving an undisguised Aurora way before production, and it nearly caused accidents. I mean, there were people craning their necks to see this thing. It stood out in the crowd. I mean, like you'd never believe. Here you're going down the highway, and there's people just like swerving back and forth just to try and get a better look at this car. So we knew even before it was introduced, it was going to be, you know, a hit styling-wise.
It still does. I mean, it's almost at the point where, despite its age, it's back to being kind of revolutionary.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, I do love on this one the red rocket logo on the wheel centers too. That's there, but it's such a contrast to what's on the road today. You know, you don't have the wedge shape, you don't have the big butt, and you have that tubular shape, which is not really done, so to speak, anymore.
No. A lot of the cars out there, the trend has been very chiseled looking, lots of lines, lots of intersecting lines. This car was so pure, the surfaces, and I got to give a lot of credit to the sculpting team. We didn't have milling machines and programmed surfaces and stuff at the time. All hand done. And, it really, really speaks to the skill level of the sculptors that worked on this car, too.
And I know
really great guys.
We were talking about, so it was introduced in 95, and then in 96 there were a number of formidable changes, Dennis. Shall we say the backlight, because of distortion, was a one-year backlight in 95.
Right. Yeah, it didn't take long to realize that there was a distortion issue in the backlight because of the reverse curve as it met the deck lid. And it wasn't until it was in production that it just really came to people's attention. So Flint went back and resurfaced the backlight and got rid of the distortion issue. So that was one of the little things that slipped through the cracks. But ultimately it was resolved and okay. So
was there any discussion about the recirc button coming in 1996 on the instrument panel?
Yeah, there's a little story about that. Like I said previously, a lot of times we'd go out to the desert proving grounds and, run these cars, and we'd have benchmark vehicles like, Infiniti and Lexus to compare and blah, blah, blah. And I remember one of the engineers made a big deal about the fact that our competition had a recirc button and we did not. It was a big deal. So next year, they went and, they introduced the recirc button on the instrument panel. So
was there anything that you really wanted but didn't get on the final car, would you say?
Adam, I'd have to say no, not really. Maybe one thing, this is a designer thing. You can't get big enough wheels for a designer.
Yeah, you got 16s. That was generous for
yeah,
the time,
yeah.
wasn't it?
16, they felt like they were doing us a huge favor. If I had my way, they'd be 18s, okay? I went through the same thing on many other programs, including the Escalade, Everybody's, doing these huge wheels, these aftermarket wheels, and then, they give you 17s and they're acting like, that's the biggest we can do. There's, So, yeah. If I had to do any, I would have put bigger wheels on the Aurora. It probably would have gave it a little bit more aggressive stance.
This one's got looks like oversized wheels.
Well, okay. Yeah, ultimately we did the pace car for the 95 Daytona 500, and which we did out in Wixom. And yes, I forget the exact size of the wheels, but they were definitely bigger than 16s. But this sketch here pretty much depicts the way the pace car turned out. Not pace car; it was actually an entry in the 500. So
brochure here,
Yep.
that you thumb through, and it's amazing. There's you, Dennis. I didn't even realize that.
Oh
Dennis,
gosh!
Look at that. At first sight, this is a quote from you. I'm sure you ginned this up yourself, right? At first sight, the Aurora may unsettle people just a bit. That means we've done our job.
Okay. I said that?
Yeah, the PR person
my
put
gosh.
those words in your mouth. But it's amazing, again, first of all, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about it. I just can't get over that what you showed is a product of the late 80s, and you look at the car now, and you still see a few of them around,
Yes.
and it looks radical again.
Yes.
And I would love to have one. I think now the issue is just trying to get parts, electronic components.
Yes. Yeah, it truly is. Like I said, it's for a designer, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Where you get a totally clean sheet of paper. Okay, all right, we want to start from the ground up. We're not carrying over an upper. We're not carrying over sheet metal. It's like clean sheet, and those opportunities are far and few in between. A lot of times, a lot of times, you're stuck with okay. I'll just use the Escalade as an example. You got to hold all the sheet metal from the cowl back, and other than that, you can go crazy. It's like so. This was not one of those. obviously. It was a clean sheet of paper. So
You have a whole nother series of stories about that Escalade that we'll have to save for another
we'll
time,
have to
right?
get into the Escalade. That's an interesting story in itself, and another one of the vehicles I'm extremely proud of because it really helped turn Cadillac's image around. It became the vehicle of choice for movie stars, rappers, this and that, and successful to this day. So it all started with the 2002, which I was a part of, and that was not an easy program based on the amount of stuff you had to carry over, and working with truck platform wasn't easy, and their bean counters, and
You know, the viewer can see what Dennis really thinks about these.
I have to take a jab at bean counters every chance I get. It's payback.
Oh, it's probably years of misery, right, that we exacted upon you.
I try to forget it.
No, think about it, Dennis. We only forced you to reuse those door handles on the Aurora, right?
Oh, and amongst other things.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis. This was an absolute pleasure.
It's my pleasure, Adam, and I really enjoyed going through this with you, and I hope the audience out there enjoys it as well. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. All right. Take care, everyone.